Mr. Chairman. Apologize if I'm a little out of breath. It's just being old. Thank you all for coming forward. It takes absolute courage. Absolute courage. Every damn meeting we have now has Trump derangement syndrome talking to it. This was a dereliction of duty by the Secretary of the Army, who refused, by the way, to come before this committee because he knew his culpability. He knew that he lied and he was derelict in the duty. And I appreciate from the bottom of my heart you guys standing up for the United States of America. You took an oath to it, as did the Secretary, and you're keeping your oath. So I deeply appreciate it at your own personal cost, because we know the weaponization of this government is occurring at an exponential rate, and it's just it is just proof in the pudding that this is what we're dealing with. I swear, why do we not have bipartisan support in getting to the bottom of this is beyond me. It's everything about Trump. Captain Nick, you know, the summer before in 2020, when there was an absolute disaster in this country where riots and burning of federal buildings occur, we saw billions of dollars, multiple deaths occur. Speaker Pelosi, I believe, is culpable with part of this in allowing this, paving the way for the terrible thing to happen on January 6th, to just dismiss America's memory of what happened the summer before. In contrast, the protests at Capitol on January 6th, which we know were all wrong, there was no hesitation in creating a politicized community. And we had a former Republican who saw it as a personal grind to go after President Trump, basically not allowing evidence to come before the committee. It's been more than 3 years, and members of the D.C. National Guard are coming forward with your oath to provide clarity. I'll just ask Captain Nick, in your testimony, you mentioned you were a confidential source for the Select Committee. In addition, you go on to state my confidentiality was breached to the national media. Would you mind expanding upon that?
Yes, sir. First, I'd like to correct a record from a previous statement from your colleague. When he asked a question about Pentagon officials and their desire to send troops, I said absolutely. I meant they did not at the time want to send troops to the Capitol, just for clarification. I was informally, after January 6th, at some time after, I was informally interviewed by the Select Committee on January 6th. I gave informal testimony and hired counsel from Tully Rickney, Dan Meyer, who's also behind me. After giving my written notes and informal testimony, a couple weeks later, I was contacted by Political from a news outlet, from a writer requesting comment on my handwritten notes they got a copy of. I then contacted Dan, who then contacted the Select Committee to resolve that. But it had to be leaked at some point from probably the Select Committee, because that's the only people I talked to and gave my notes to.
It is obviously evident with anybody with an objective eye that the committee was put forth to tell one thing. If that committee had gone in front of anything in a legal department, you would have cross-examination, other witnesses, etc. We never saw any of that to get to the actual truth, which is what all Americans, whether you're which party or not, should believe in doing. Period. I just want to reiterate something. This is actually, I guess, to Colonel Matthews and General Dean. Turning to the matter of security, Secretary of the Army and McCarthy have said the D.C. National Guard was not prepared for immediate deployment. Do you agree with that statement?
That statement is false. We were prepared in many ways. We even had backup plans. We call them branches and sequels, right? So not only did we have a force that was at Andrews Air Force Base that was training and doing civil disturbance that weekend, prepared to deploy on that day, that was ready to deploy on that day, we also had traffic control points that were at MPD, and those members had riot control gear in the trunk, not visible to the public, but for their self-protection in case MPD had to respond. They had the appropriate gear to provide civil disturbance, riot control efforts if needed. And so we had the capability, we had the planning, we had the know-how. So the question that I have is, so out of all the events, out of all the inaugurations the District of Columbia National Guard supported, out of all the NATO summits, out of all the IMF protests that we've had, the summer of 2020, COVID we were not able to respond to this, we're incapable, that's categorically false.
I find it just, my time is short, but I just find it a slap in the face to all the good men and women who serve in our armed forces to say you're not prepared. A slap in the face. And because this guy wanted to save his butt with the hope of getting in the Biden administration, that's point blank what happened. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.